everyone, it's Brennan. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another video. Today I have for you my October reading wrap up. I read 7 books in October and I got about halfway through 2 other books. So without further ado, let's get started with this wrap up. The first book I'm going to talk about is The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I read this because I wanted to read some thrillers in October. I see this cover all the time on the internet and I see it get good reviews a lot. And it was pretty good. I did not love it. I feel like with thrillers, I'm either underwhelmed or I'm just completely in love with them. And this book revolves around the silent patient, and her name is Alicia. 6 years ago, she is said to have murdered her husband without reason, and she has not spoken a word since that day. The story is told from the point of view of a psychotherapist who has kind of been very drawn to Alicia's case, and he applies to work at the facility where Alicia is being treated. And our narrator, I can't even remember his name anymore, but he kind of gets a little like scummy feeling to me. Like he's always being really nice to people, but then you hear his inner dialogue in his head and he's like really catty and rude. But I enjoyed the story. It was a little slow, and I would really only say there was only one twist in it, like one good twist in it, and it happened within the last like 30 pages, and I feel like it was just thrown in so nonchalantly, which is good. Like, it was done well, I suppose, but I just wasn't very excited while I was reading this book. But it was a quick read. It's like 300 pages. I don't really know if I would recommend it. I gave it 4 stars, which sounds really good. It felt more like a 3.5 star, but I did appreciate the twist at the end. So yes, The Silent Patient, Alex Michaelides. It was okay. I actually think this was like Goodreads 2019 thriller of the year. And the next book I will talk about is Nightfall by Penelope Douglas. This was the last book in her Devil's Night series. I believe it came out in July of this year. And I did a whole video reviewing and talking about this series. I will link it below. But this is a new adult dark romance series, and it is set around the events of Devil's Night, which is the day before Halloween. It's actually today, October 30th. And all the kids in this town of Thunder Bay, which is like a very wealthy, affluent area, they get into some chaos. They like to cause a little mayhem on Devil's Night every year. There's 4 books in this series, and each book follows a different male main character, and they have all been friends pretty much their entire lives. We get a new female character in each book, and there's an underlying plot of just these wealthy, beautiful people making a name for themselves and developing relationships and starting families, and I really enjoyed it. This 4th book, Nightfall, follows Will and Emery, and Will is kind of the not serious, kind of like the clown of the group, and throughout the series he struggled with some alcohol and drug abuse problems, and he finds himself in an interesting situation in this 4th book, and so does his former love interest Emery. They kind of had like a very short little thing when they were in high school together. Emery was the nerd in high school. She was at their very wealthy school on a scholarship, and she just wanted to keep her head down and do well in school so she could get a scholarship to college. She had a really rough home life, and then in this book, Will and Emery find themselves trying to get out of a very interesting situation that I won't mention because it might ruin some of the previous books for you. But I gave this book 4 stars. It was a good wrap up to this series. It was over 600 pages, and my only complaint is that I felt like their will they won't they went on a little bit too long. But yes, Penelope Douglas, so far she has not disappointed me. The next book I will talk about is Be Not Far From Me by Mindy McGinnis. When I read this book earlier this month, it was free with Prime Reading. So if that's a service that you use, I would highly recommend it. You can download up to 10 Kindle books at a time and read for free. This was so good. We follow our main character, Ashley, and she is a 17-year-old in high school in Tennessee. And she and her friends are having like a bonfire camp night in the mountains, and she catches her boyfriend cheating on her, and she drunkenly runs off into the woods and she gets lost. Now, Ashley does have some experience with camping and hiking and a little bit of survival training, so that's good because she has to do some serious surviving. She suffers a pretty serious injury as she's running away, So warnings that this book has some graphic descriptions in it, graphic descriptions of injuries and survival, but I loved this. I just loved being inside Ashley's head. She was so tough. You watch her grow even more as a character. She's had a very impoverished upbringing. She's from a single parent household that doesn't bring in a lot of money. So you get to hear from her and her just experience growing up and her dreams and her plans for life, and then you get to watch her survive in the Smoky Mountains. I really don't know what else to say about this book other than I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. It has been one of my favorite books I've read this year. I have another Mindy McGinnis book on my shelf. It's her The Female of the Species book, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading some more Mindy McGinnis. Also, this book made me realize that I just really like survival stories, and I'm looking for more. So if you have survival book recommendations, please leave them below because I am a fan. And the last fiction book that I completed this month was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I listened to this on audio. The audiobook has been free with your Audible membership, and I will say the audiobook is excellent. The narrator has won awards for this performance. It was really good. Also, just as a side note, Frankenstein was written in 1818. That was over 200 years ago, but I picked this up. It's Halloween, it's October, so I was interested in giving this a listen. And I will say, what century would this have been? 19th century? 19th century dialogue is so dramatic. This story is completely told from different men's perspectives, and these men are so dramatic in their words. I want to do a video just reviewing Frankenstein because I had so many thoughts as I was listening to this. So our story starts out, it's like this adventurer, and he is writing to his sister and telling his sister a story of when he met Frankenstein, who is the scientist, and then Frankenstein is telling this first character his story, and then Frankenstein starts telling the story of his monster when his monster told Frankenstein the story. Does that make sense? Good. And Frankenstein and his monster, in my opinion, they are just competing to be the loneliest, saddest boy in the world. All of them are just complaining about how lonely they feel. And I gotta say, like, I'm completely team Frankenstein's monster because he is a rational being. He makes good informed choices, and Victor Frankenstein, to me, was the villain in this story. Really interesting, classic literature. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. It was like good, but also like these men were very dramatic and complained a lot and threw a lot of pity parties, and if something bad ever happened to Victor Frankenstein, it would take him 2 months to like emotionally recover. Not like downing that, but also he could grow up a little bit. Another audiobook I listened to this month was Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers and Rob Wolf. This was so good. I gave this book 5 stars. It is nonfiction. Diana Rogers is a dietitian, and Rob Wolf has been in the like health and nutrition industry for a long time. And this book just answers so many questions about cattle farming and meat and health, and it really delves into environmental impacts from different farming practices. It gives reasonable recommendations for including meat in your diet and more sustainable restorative agricultural practices. I really enjoyed this book, and I mentioned it in a vlog that I did, but I know you should read books that are from like different perspectives from your own, but this book just really spoke to me. I just really felt like I was simpatico with Diana Rogers. Oh, also I read this book and used it in some assignments for my graduate program right now. Very beneficial, very eye-opening, very reassuring and inspiring for the future of feeding the world and the future of environmental sustainability with agriculture. And the last book I completed this month was another audiobook, and this was Sam Harris's Making Sense. And this book is a bunch of different excerpts from Sam Harris's podcast, which is also called Making Sense, and it is just his best conversations that he's had with different individuals. I will say the first 2 or 3 of these conversations kind of went over my head a lot, as in they get really into consciousness and neuroscience. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist, and it was hard for me to follow along with some of those, but then they started getting into conversations on race and humanity and religion, and those I really connected with more. His conversation on race was one of the best conversations on the topic that I have listened to. Would highly recommend it. He has some experts in all of these fields on his podcast, and I really enjoyed this, but I just felt very lucky to be listening to these conversations being had, and even if I could not fully absorb some of them, I was glad to listen to them, and I really got a lot from other conversations he had as well. Oh, and that was not the last book I finished this month, because I just finished one yesterday after I wrote all of my books down. But I also finished My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This was also an audiobook. This has just been the month of audiobooks for me. And this was also free with your Audible membership at the moment. This is like a humorous horror story, and it is set in the 1980s in Charleston, South Carolina, and we follow a group of sophomore girls in high school, and one of them gets possessed by a demon, literally. And we get the story from the perspective of her best friend, Abby. We follow Abby as she's trying to figure out why her best friend Gretchen is changing so much, why she's becoming so manipulative and just plain evil. And I feel like this had the potential to be like a really, really fun, exciting story, but nothing went right for Abby. I felt anxiety, and not entertainment level anxiety, if that makes sense. I felt anxiety and stress for Abby because nothing went right for her. Nothing was going well for their friends. And I kept waiting to like get past that, and then the book ended, and like, do they solve their issues? Yes, but also it just didn't end to me very well. I guess I really like a more positive ending for my books. It was very entertaining. I loved the 80s pop culture. Each chapter is like the title of a different 80s song lyric, and the fashion that's described in the story is really cool. But I just felt a little stressed the whole time because nothing was going well, like I mentioned. But it was entertaining. It was free. The cover, let's talk about the cover. This is beautiful. I love this cover. I almost went to buy the book just to have it on my shelf. But it definitely had a good atmosphere and a good story. I just wish it could have gone a little better for our characters. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, and then just some honorable mentions. I am halfway through Not Filmed by Marisha Pessel. It doesn't look like I'm halfway through, but I'm on like almost page 300 out of 600 some. And I'm just going to mention, I got the hardcover of this book, and I wish I had the paperback because this is so heavy. I'll be sitting and reading this and my wrists will get tired. But this has a lot of mixed media in it. They do a lot of internet searches and different media and things like that. But this book is really cool. I'll describe it more next month. But we are following a journalist as he investigates the suicide of the daughter of a very renowned horror film director. And this horror film director has not been seen in the last 30 years. He's very mysterious, no one hears very much about him, and we're following this creepy investigation that the journalist and a couple of random little sidekicks go on. And the Kindle book that I am about 60% through right now is Daughters of the Lake. It's another book that's free with Prime Reading right now, and I picked this up because I also picked up The Haunting of Bryn Wilder. I'll throw that in there. And it was, Amazon was doing this thing where they were giving free ebooks to new releases to Prime members, I don't know. And when I started reading The Haunting of Bryn Wilder, I could tell that there was a book that came before it. I don't know if they are standalones because they're both different stories, but there were going to be some character crossovers, and the Daughters of the Lake was free, so I just decided to start with it. And it is like a wholesome, spooky story. It's set in a touristy, very quaint lakeside town on Lake Superior, and we follow Kate, who is going through a rough time. She's been through a divorce, she's quit her job, and she is just taking some time to hang out at their family inn with her cousin. But she has been having some dreams and seeing a lady in her dreams, and then all of a sudden that lady washes up dead on the beach in front of her parents' house. What is even more interesting is that that lady lived 100 years ago. So how is her very intact corpse washing up on a beach in the present day? So this has a dual timeline. We get to see from Addie is the name of the woman who washes up on the beach. we get to see her past, and then we follow Kate's present. And there's definitely a supernatural aspect to the story. There's romance in both Addie's and Kate's stories. But my main complaint is that these are some weak female characters. Addie just seems to drop everything for her love interest. She's like, oh, I really don't want to become this socialite and host these very extravagant dinner parties, but since you want me to, and since you're saying that it's very important for you to further your business, then I'll do it because I love you. And that's not my favorite. And then Kate quit her job because her husband still works there. And Kate is doing some investigating on her own. And then like her cousin and the detective who's also investigating that she is developing a love interest with, they're like, Kate, you really need to take a step back. You're just really overexerting yourself on this case. And she's like, oh, maybe you're right. Like, this is very difficult for me. And it's a little annoying. But I really like the atmosphere, and the story is interesting. So I'll definitely finish this book, and then eventually I'll pick up The Haunting of Bryn Wilder. We'll see. I like that because it has my name in the title of it. Alright, you guys, those are the books that I have read in October and the last couple books that I am finishing up this month. Let me know in a comment down below some of the books you read this month. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you've thought of them. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one.